Welcome to Talking Europe. Now, my guest today, Nadia Calviño, was recently named one of Europe's top doers in Politico's annual list of the continent's most influential people. Now, Calviño, an economist and a lawyer by training, has been president of the European Investment Bank since January 2024. And before that, she was the deputy prime minister of Spain in the government of Pedro Sanchez. Now, what Calviño's been doing is heading up one of the world's largest multinational lenders at a time when Europe has been racing to step up its own defense and security in a colder, and let's just say it, a more hostile world. Welcome to our studios, Nadia Calviño. As we speak today, Europe is grappling with the economic and political fallout of two wars that it did not choose. Vladimir Putin's war of aggression against Ukraine and Donald Trump's, I'll call it this, war of choice against Iran. How is that affecting your work?
Well, it's very clear that these two wars show that Europe needs to reinforce its strategic autonomy in the area of energy. We simply need to break free from excessive dependence on fossil fuels. And fortunately, we are in a better position today than we were 4 years ago when the war broke in Ukraine. And that explains why the impact of the war in the Middle East is less relevant for Europe than it was 4 years ago. And we need to double down. We need to continue on this track to reinforce our homegrown energy sources, to reinforce our energy efficiency, our grids, our technologies, so that we can indeed become more independent and have a stronger voice in this brave new world around us.
The numbers themselves are impressive. I believe that spending has doubled in the past couple of years on security and defense. This year, the EIB group's financing goal is roughly what it was last year, 100 billion euros in lending. Correct me if I'm wrong, Nadia Calviño, but I think 4.5 billion euros of that is for security and defense. What exactly are we talking about? What are the big projects right now?
Well, the European Investment Bank is uniquely placed to finance large infrastructures, critical infrastructures, military mobility, for example, with long-term loans. Also to provide liquidity to small and medium-sized companies in the value chain of large defense contractors through the banking sector, because we have an unparalleled network of banks, also investment funds, private investment funds. And that explains why in just barely 1.5 years, we've been able to ramp up our financing in this area, already reaching 5% of total finance inside the EU. We are keeping the same target for 2026, but I wouldn't exclude that we revise all of these upwards in the course of the year.
You have said, I'm going to switch gears a little bit, you've said in many of the comments you've made and speeches you made that Europe is a global superpower. Maybe it's an underappreciated global superpower, but a superpower, a 19 trillion euro economy, plus, and you might not get this with other superpowers, the democratic values that come with that. But it does face some supersized domestic problems, including a housing crunch in many of the cities and regions. I just want for our viewers to know that since 2015, housing prices in Europe have jumped by an average of 60%. France 24's Oyhanda Almandoz and Renaud Lefort went to your home country, to Barcelona, to check out one of the housing flashpoints.
Barcelona is at the epicenter of the housing crisis in Europe. Chema, a science teacher, will soon no longer have a roof over his head.
Demanda de juicio, desahucio, y bueno, para pedir que me marche.
Rents are becoming increasingly expensive in the EU, but in this case, Chema has another problem. An investment fund has just bought his building to turn it into a co-living space. That means short-term rentals for smaller apartments at a higher rate.
There are families here, old people, young people. What we want is to fight for our right to stay in our homes.
But Chema has few alternatives.
I will have to go back to my parents' home at 33 years old. And I consider myself lucky. There are some people that can't even do that.
For now, he's in the midst of a legal battle. Chema says the local authorities are not doing enough. The European Union, though, is looking to bring in new legislation.
If the European Union says that seasonal and holiday letting should be regulated, I'm all for it. But that has to mean real action.
For the first time in its history, the European Union has named a commissioner for housing and has launched an affordable housing plan.
In the past, the European Commission has not played a big role here. We need a huge wake-up call in Europe. If people don't have a home, if they cannot afford the most basic needs, which is a real risk that they will turn against democracy and protests.
Since 2021, the EU has invested 43 billion euros in housing initiatives to fight against this ticking time bomb.
¿Cuándo terminarán las obras?
Mary creo que nos dijo que en junio terminaba.
In Igualda, an hour from Barcelona, Elia and Andreu are getting ready to move into this old textile factory. Based on a cooperative financing model, its renovation was partially funded by the EU.
This project started in 2021 when a group of young local people launched this initiative. We wanted to find a way of living as a community, using an anti-speculative housing model.
This is a good alternative. It's not the solution to the housing crisis, but it is a good option, and we are committed to it.
Renovating old housing stock is one solution, but new builds are just as vital. The Salas Foundation looks after social housing across Spain, including this residence of 106 apartments in Terrassa.
Each apartment has a kitchen, and on the roof we have solar panels which produce all the required electricity.
According to the Housing Commission, around 2 million additional homes are needed in the EU every year.
We have received a total of 50 million euros in European funding, and we look after approximately 1,650 homes, but are funded by the EU.
Housing policy remains the responsibility of member states, even if the EU wants to get involved to make living in Europe that little bit easier.
Housing is a giant issue. We could spend a whole day talking about this crisis. But I want to know, in particular, I know the EIB has some ambitious projects in various countries involving social housing. Could you highlight one or two what the EIB is doing to sort of alleviate the housing pain for a lot of people?
Well, indeed, this was one of the surprising discoveries I made when I became president of the European Investment Bank, which is that the housing issue is not just a Spanish problem. It is a concern for almost all member states. And it's because we've had, as your colleagues have shown, a perfect storm since the pandemic. A number of elements explain this situation. Normally, the competence is mostly regional or local, but from the European institutions, we want to help. And that's why in the European Investment Bank, we have doubled our funding in this area.
How much are we talking about?
Well, this year we're planning to invest 6 billion euros in housing in 3 key areas. Research for new materials, new building techniques so that houses can be built cheaper and faster. Secondly, refurbishment, retrofitting of existing stock, the existing stock of buildings in Europe. And thirdly, new projects. Actually, we have very important initiatives in Barcelona. I was able to visit them on site, Valencia, but also here in France, which is the main country of operations in the area of housing so far. I was recently in Lisbon, for example, working very closely with the Portuguese government in terms of social housing, but also in Italy. In Naples, we are financing student housing. In Prague, all around Europe, we are financing important projects. And I hope that quite soon we will see a difference and younger families will have access to affordable houses.
So the housing issue on one side, and unfortunately, Nadia Calviño, back to the war on the other side. The International Energy Agency has said in recent weeks that the war in the Middle East is causing, and I'm quoting here, the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market. I imagine that your mandate is changing a lot given your emphasis on energy and tech sovereignty. Can you tell me a specific way this war is looking to change the way you do your job in the year ahead?
Well, what I expect is that we will just have to accelerate what we're currently doing. And actually, finance ministers unanimously have supported our course of action. We need to double down on this green transition, making it a European success, because that's the right way forward to ensure that Europe becomes more independent when it comes to energy, also security and defense. We are on track. The European Investment Bank is where it needs to be. And I think that we will just need to continue to reach more scale and speed in making a difference on the ground.
Shifting a little bit right now to Ukraine, I mentioned one of the other big wars raging right now in Europe's neighborhood. The EU's leaders have been having a hard time unlocking the 90 billion euro loan. There's been some resistance in the EU's ranks for Ukraine. What role, if any, can the EIB play in helping Ukraine, in investment in Ukraine, on whatever front?
Well, we are one of the key investment partners to the Ukrainian government. We mobilized 4 billion euros since the beginning of the war, and that means reconstructing, rebuilding key infrastructures, energy, transport, but also kindergartens, hospitals, homes throughout Ukraine, and also supporting SMEs, so the real economy in Ukraine, through the banking sector.
These are long-term loans.
Well, some of them are long-term loans. In other cases, we're using guarantees. So we are using different financial instruments with an aim to build back better, so that when we are, for example, rebuilding a kindergarten, we provide shelters, right. We provide systems to try to avoid that it is damaged again if there's an attack by Russia. I am quite confident that the Ukrainian economy is going to bounce back very strongly once the war is over, because I've seen the resilience of the Ukrainian people. We work closely also with President Zelensky in identifying what are the key investments and how can we mobilize private investment as soon as possible so that the economy of the country can recover quite fast.
Can recover fast. I'm going to end with what we some might call the elephant in the room, Donald Trump. What right now is the biggest challenge in the face of the United States, which has been, let's just say it, retreating from Europe and threatening Europe in many ways with the tariff policy?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting to note that the tariff shock actually affected U.S. companies more than European companies. We do a yearly survey of companies, 13,000 companies, and it shows very clearly that European companies have adjusted, and they are benefiting from the incredible network of trade agreements we have throughout the world, 76 trade agreements, which will very soon incorporate Mercosur, India, Indonesia. The rest of the world, I think, is sending a very strong message, which is when some are pushing back, we're moving forward. And we're moving forward together, trying to also continue to build a better world, based on mutual respect and win-win partnerships. And from the European Investment Bank, we're putting our money where our mouth is and trying to support this world of opportunity, in the middle of so many challenges, difficulties, and conflicts.
Nadia Calviño, we're going to have to leave it there, but I will leave our viewers with some words you didn't say today, but you've said in the past, which is, when Europeans stick together, they're unstoppable. I guess you still agree with that.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So this has been about Europe's resilience now and hopefully looking ahead in the future. I've been very happy. Thank you for joining us today. Nadia Calviño, the president of the European Investment Bank, with a very big remit in her inbox. And thanks to all of you for joining us here on Talking Europe.